Hey Blogalog, how are you guys doing? I'm doing okay. You missed me last week, but hopefully that shouldn't be happening again. And I'm fixing some things going on in my life and getting a better stable hold on life. But speaking of such things, this week we're talking about about the creative versus, creative versus the science, which was what Kevin titled his video and was talking about, and then clarifying, kind of going more for like, the artsy versus the scientific type of dichotomy. Though that question of that dichotomy really is really weird for me, at least, because and I'm gonna touch on this before I talk about whether or not I'm artsy or not, because I think we all know the answer to whether or not I'm artsy, or at least I kind of hope, maybe. So I think it's a weird dichotomy that exists because of this idea that, science is so, I guess it's so strict, and the idea that, like, when you're artsy, you're so free-flowing and open-minded, I guess. And I think that's where it comes from, is this idea that if you're scientific, you're not open-minded. And I think that's a weird perception to have because of just the way science has existed. I mean, for a long time, the world thought, everyone in the world thought the world was flat. And that's just the way it was until someone dared to think about the potential that, no, it's actually, we're not flat, we're a globe, we're circular, and dared to prove it. And, a lot of, I think it takes some kind of creativity or some kind of open-mindedness to think the world might exist differently than public perception and then go out and prove it. I think there's a certain thing to that, to having your own ideas about how the world exists and then trying to go and prove it, and being willing to do that kind of thing. I think there's some amount of creativity, at least, that goes into that. So I think that's part of why I think it's a weird dichotomy, because I think a lot of it comes from that idea that scientists aren't necessarily as open-minded. They're so strict and things have to go, like, I think it comes from a place of understanding that, science has so many rules and guidelines that we start to forget that the way these rules and guidelines got established was because it's more rules of understanding and figuring out and proving that what you're saying is right versus just, being the artsy person who dares to imagine a place where something like that might exist, outside of the world, I guess. So I think that's a thing. So it's a weird dichotomy to be having. But as far as it exists, I'm pretty near the center, actually. I lean over more towards artsy, obviously. I guess sort of being an English major, but I don't hate math or science. I mean, I remember being really glad at my first college when the way they talked about it, I only had to take a math class and a science class for like 2 science classes or something like that if I wanted to, and that was all that was required of me, and it could be whatever I wanted. So I was really excited about that, because I could never, I could have feasibly gone through that school and through that program and never taken a math class. But I don't hate math or anything. Like, I don't hate math or science, or I don't really particularly suck at it. I actually do math really well. Science, it depends on the kind of science, and a few other things. I think as far as the school environment, and as far as teaching it, is kind of like the way you go about it with research and like doing labs, and how lab intensive college classes are. Doing the labs were more problematic for me, and not necessarily going through with them, but like the equations that we had to figure out for those, and memorizing those equations and remembering just how to function it all together, and all of these having a different purpose and everything, while also trying to focus on analyzing stuff. Just it didn't do very well for me. So I think that kind of detracted from some of it. I just like, as far as science goes, I like learning how things function and how the world is working and like what's going on in the world and how what we're finding out today impacts the past and the present and the future and like how it shapes all of these things. And I really like, I enjoy learning about that, but I don't like learning about equations that I could use that I never will, because I'm not going to be the person who, or I'm not, I don't want to set out to be the person who finds out how to space travel. I'd rather write about it and about the potential of what the human race could achieve if they did that in some far, in a different universe, or in this universe if it happened, and like how it could change the human psyche and stuff. I'd much rather write about it than be the person who writes out the equation that solves the problem. And reveals different things. Like it's a different aspect of it, I guess. It's just how I happen to be and kind of see the world. So it's a lot of that. And I think that comes down to a lot of it is I'd rather, I mean, as far as math goes, I can do math fairly well and stuff. Not that it really interests me to figure out like equations for like I like figuring out the last number in pi if there ever is one. That's not where my interest lies, or figuring out the equation for how to compose an atom or something. I don't feel like there's an actual equation for that, but I think you guys get what I mean. But yeah, so I'm on the more artsy side of wanting to delve into like the human psyche and history, and writing about fantasy worlds and figuring out like fake cultures to comment on our own and things like that. That's where I have fun and where I do really well at understanding and all this other stuff. So so I lean that way, but it's also kind of weird because ask a lot of my really close friends or even like my parents, and they'll tell you I think really linear, I guess linearly, linear. Okay, I'm gonna stop trying to pronounce that word. I have a very analytical frame of thought, so I keep it sort of like I'm a grounded dreamer. Like I keep things sort of realistic to an extent. I think kind of in the way a mathematician or a scientist does, but I write. I do that instead of doing it, like instead of using that for the way normal people, I guess people would normally associate it with, like turning into a mathematician or a lawyer or something like that. Instead, I put it towards making up fake worlds where people are able to create flames and stuff without like matches or stuff, like that kind of thing. But yeah, that's just the kind of person I am and the way I see this. So that's about all I'm gonna ramble on for you guys. So until next week, vlog. Bye.